Hyperlight Breakers is the long-awaited follow-up of Heart Machine's well-received Hyperlight Drifter, released back in 2016. Unlike with their previous title, it seems that they too have resorted to moving things towards the action roguelite and roguelike genre, while focusing less on an underlying story and more on the action-packed gameplay that encompasses a battle royale map where you're scavenging for materials and gear to become stronger to the point where you can actually reach your end goal destinations. There's a lot of promise behind it as long as all of the issues are fixed during what is now more of an alpha period than early access due to the number of difficulties that appear to be troubling many community members, including myself. Hyperlight Breakers has a really catchy ring to its name, as in its current state, all it really does is break you down piece by piece as you struggle to find the fun in playing for, not 2, not 4, but 10 to 12 hours until you finally realize what you're actually supposed to be doing. In the current state, it doesn't ease you into anything. There is no basic tutorial, which honestly should be one of the first features available, not something that is supposed to be released later on to help you get to know your character or characters that you will eventually be able to choose from, assuming you can never make any significant progress to get the resources that you need to do so. Now, before you claim skill issue to defend the game, it's honestly not that. The game itself is pretty simple, but it just lacks a basic understanding of what you can do with all of your skills and all of your gear. This is a game that will demand that you fail for several hours until you fully comprehend what the premise is, how to use all of your skills, and how to navigate the map effectively in order to make consistent progress. Unless you have a friend to play with, or can tag along with one of the few open lobbies, you have two options. Suffer 12 hours of gameplay solo, making barely any progress, to tons of slow cutscenes and very challenging obstacles that are challenging because this is more of a looter-shooter, where you're going to need to keep looting and extracting over and over again until you're strong enough. Or you can just tag along with others who can help you because they already have that gear. That is, that they can revive you, help you defeat bosses, and one-shot everything because they have been playing the game for the past 20 hours and have some fairly powerful legendary gear and effects like crits heal you, and everything is transferred between runs and between servers, making them insanely overpowered with no real drawback since the game doesn't scale. Even if it does scale a little bit in multiplayer, it doesn't matter, they are going to destroy everything. Spending hours and hours on dead screens because you were hit by an unknown factor that you should have known about but you couldn't have without confronting it directly makes it an extremely frustrating method to learn a game. And that is saying a lot considering I normally play a lot of hardcore Dead is Dead and action RPGs, which is basically a lot of trial and error. There also appears to be a number of issues with the input from both controllers and with keyboard and mouse, at least from my perspective. This could be due to a conflict of inputs as I did attempt to play both at random intervals. Things like the camera suddenly flying off into the sky with the keyboard and mouse, while the controller would completely stop you in your tracks at random intervals. This was a very frustrating element to deal with when you're trying to constantly be on the move to avoid incoming enemies that you need to parry and dodge around effectively. Until you start defeating elites and bosses and leveling up through randomly sprinkled out gear and effects, the world doesn't feel very active. It actually feels very barren with a lot of the same components scattered about. Once the danger meter is full, you will then proceed to extraction, which is a pretty hectic horde of monsters that are pretty much bound to kill you. In the current state, you can't really communicate with any of your teammates outside of pinging them with a marker on the ground, which really isn't that reliable. Allies can also not see your map markers either. They definitely do need a chat system or a better system at some point that helps you be a bit more helpful in giving directions or ideas on where you would like to go next. And because this game itself doesn't really teach you anything, I'm going to go ahead and assist you with getting started, or at the very least to help you understand what you're going to be expecting. Instead of running around, hold the dash button to get on your hoverboard, and go faster by holding the jump button and jumping around. Unsure if this is actually a bug, but you can really stack up a lot of momentum with a proper setup. This will deplete your stamina, which you then have to wait for to replenish. So in the meantime, you'll kill a few monsters or maybe search for some extra gear. If you're playing solo, you have 1 life and 1 health kit that you can restore at shrines, as long as you have the blood currency which is dropped from crates, supplies, and enemies. So you will want to use them sparingly because it's one of your main features of staying alive outside of using your parry. This game heavily adopts a more Souls-like approach with their parry system as the primary way to finesse your enemies and also bosses, which offers you an extra way to heal yourself, while dashing and rotating to your melee and energy charged weapons. When you open your map, you're going to be greeted with a randomly generated roguelite world full of point of interests, and you're going to want to search all of these areas in order to proceed towards unlocking each of the boss arenas via these prisms that unlock each seal. You have 4 attempts before the map resets, and you're expected to get in and get out intermediately, so each run will be about 4 to 5 trips to complete. The issue with this is that you're going to farm elites to obtain better gear and effects. Then you have to extract to repair the unbuilt stations, and then you again return for another run to farm for more elements, extracting once more to finally have these stations be built. And then you can begin upgrading your character and possibly unlocking another if you were able to find the resources you need or rations to unlock new features from these newly repaired stations when you finally get back. It's a lot of cycling around multiple successful runs to make any meaningful progress. That alone will take you approximately 4 hours, and once you feel strong enough with the effects and gear, especially if you were able to obtain any rares or legendaries, then you can proceed to unlock the boss arena and then begin your fight against the heavily inspired visual boss designs that you would expect to see in a game like Bloodborne, or the handful of other bosses that appear on your list, which are more than guaranteed to kill you on your very first attempt. And remember, if you do die at any point during this farming or boss section, which you will based on how it plays out, you will lose one of your 4 attempts that you have to complete this cycle, until everything is reset and the majority of your gear is destroyed based on its tier. Some will be destroyed after 1 attempt, others after 2 or 3, which is kind of a huge letdown as it's going to set you back to square one, especially if you weren't putting any gear into your storage. So basically you're going to farm for gear, farm elites, upgrade your equipment, and extract before the meter reaches full. Regroup, replan, and upgrade if possible before attempting to continue progressing on the current map until all of the bosses have been defeated, in which the cycle begins again. So if you do survive, or if your gear survives, you can then transfer that to the next cycles and even other characters, or you can even join other players and help them steamroll through the content. But outside of that, it's currently just a continuous loop that doesn't scale with you, making it rather trivial to do anything other than wait for the full release. It feels more like a blend of solo extraction battle royale aspects that function really well, but are still quite tough to wrap your head around over the first 9 hours of playtime. You can definitely tell there's a lot of risk-of-rain elements here, with each enemy and character that you encounter, but with a significantly unpolished feel to it all. I really didn't like the guns and how they were tied to this energy feature. They are good for bosses and certain scenarios where you need specific things like AoE clear or spreading effects and so on, but you're pretty much forced into a melee and parry style of gameplay to really have a chance. Unless you once again found an extremely powerful gun that can clear massive waves of enemies with the right effects that you can constantly shift in and out of with your builds. If it hadn't been for the assistance of a community member who had played through 20 hours of the game already, I would have given up after the first 2 hours, because I wouldn't have had any gear and would still be struggling to grasp the mechanics of the game without them. All things considered, it's a pretty big step back from their previous game in elements, and while it does currently have a lot of issues surrounding what people are considering very boring and tedious gameplay that doesn't really offer a whole lot but frustration, I want to say that it was neither good nor bad. It has a lot of promise behind it, but it's not something that I would currently recommend to anybody, especially at this price tag. This is more or less a showcasing of what they have to offer for the future. At the moment, what's on display feels more like an alpha version, not early access, and appears to have been pushed out because they want to give people a taste of what they've been working on for the last few years. And it is moderately fun if you can get over the initial hurdle of needing to play for a bare minimum of 10 hours to actually understand a game if you're playing solo, and then going from there. But that's really a time sink hurdle that most won't care for. There are simply far better choices in the current action roguelike and roguelike genre that have been released recently that I would much rather suggest at this current time, considering that you can get many more games at a lower price that are currently also in early access to tide you over, like with Windblown or even Sulphur, which does this whole start over from scratch system so much more smoothly. If you love the developers and you want to support them, it's perfectly fine to do so, but if you're looking for a game that you can play for a very long time over and over while finding it to be genuinely fun, it's a hard pass for now because of the lack of certain elements and features that should be here by default. I'd give it another year or two in development before seeing what it fully brings to the table.